The sharp crack of a pistol echoed through the dusty main street of Redemption Creek, sending Catherine Miller darting behind a water trough, her heart hammering against her ribs. The spring of 1876 had brought new life to the Montana Territory, but for Catherine it had only brought terror. She pressed her back against the rough wooden slats, willing herself to disappear as the heavy footfalls of her pursuer crunched through the dirt. Come out, Miss Miller," called Abel Blackwood, his voice carrying a false sweetness that made her blood run cold. "You know you can't hide forever in this miserable excuse for a town." Catherine closed her eyes, clutching the small leather pouch hanging from her neck. Inside was the deed to her father's gold claim, the very document Abel had killed her father to possess. 3 days she'd been running, sleeping in barns and abandoned shacks, making her way to this frontier settlement in hopes of finding the law. But the sheriff's office had been empty, and now Abel had caught up to her. The sound of spurs jangling made her tense, but they weren't coming from Abel's direction. Catherine risked a glance around the water trough and saw a tall figure walking purposefully down the center of the street. Even from a distance, everything about him spoke of the frontier, from his worn leather chaps to the way he carried himself with quiet confidence. "You there?" Abel called, turning his attention to the approaching stranger. "You seen a woman run by? Red hair, blue dress." The stranger stopped, his hand casually resting near his holstered Colt. "Can't say that I have," he replied, his voice deep and measured. "What business you have with such a lady?" Catherine held her breath. The newcomer stood between her hiding spot and Abel, unknowingly becoming her shield. "That's private matters," Abel snapped, his patience clearly thinning. "Step aside, cowboy." The stranger didn't move. "Name's Xavier Reeves," he said calmly, "and I don't much care for men chasing women with guns drawn." Catherine could see the tension building between the two men, the stranger called Xavier standing relaxed but alert, while Abel's posture grew increasingly agitated. She knew Abel's temper, knew what he was capable of when crossed. "Your funeral," Abel snarled, his hand dropping to his gun. But Xavier was faster. In one fluid motion, his revolver cleared its holster and fired. Abel staggered backward, clutching his shoulder, his own weapon dropping to the dirt. "You shot me," Abel exclaimed, more surprised than in pain. "Be thankful I aimed for your shoulder," Xavier replied coolly. "Now, I suggest you find a doctor and then leave town. Whatever business you have here is concluded." 2 men from the saloon across the street, drawn by the gunshot, hurried over and took charge of the wounded Abel, who continued to curse and threaten as they led him away. Only when Abel was out of sight did Catherine dare to emerge from her hiding place, her legs shaking so badly she could barely stand. Xavier turned at the sound of her movement, his expression softening when he saw her. "Miss," he said, tipping his hat, "I reckon you might be the lady that man was looking for." Catherine nodded, still trembling. "He killed my father," she managed to say. "3 days ago at our claim near Whitefish Creek. He wants this." She touched the leather pouch at her neck. "The deed to my father's gold mine." Xavier holstered his weapon and studied her face. He was handsome in a rugged way, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a clear Montana sky. A thin scar ran along his jaw, disappearing into the short beard that covered his chin. "You look like you haven't eaten in days," he observed. "There's a decent cafe down the street. Why don't we get you something to eat, and you can tell me the whole story?" Catherine hesitated, years of her father's warnings about trusting strangers warring with her desperate need for help. "How do I know I can trust you?" she asked. A ghost of a smile touched Xavier's lips. "You don't. But I just shot a man to protect someone I didn't even know was there. That ought to count for something." Despite everything, Catherine found herself returning his slight smile. I suppose it does. Besides, Xavier added, I'm riding out to my brother's ranch tomorrow. It's about 2 days' journey from here, in the opposite direction of Whitefish Creek. You'd be welcome to ride along, at least until we can find a U.S. Marshal to take your statement about your father. The idea of escape, of safety, was too tempting to resist. Catherine nodded. Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Xavier, he corrected, offering his arm in a gesture that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. And you are? Catherine Miller, she replied, tentatively placing her hand on his offered arm. My friends call me Cat. Well, Miss Catherine, he said, guiding her toward the cafe. Let's get some food in you, and then we can figure out what to do about that man with the gun. The cafe was a simple establishment with wooden tables and the comforting aroma of fresh bread and coffee. Catherine sank gratefully into a chair as Xavier ordered them both stew and coffee. Only when the steaming bowl was placed before her did she realize how famished she truly was. Eat, Xavier encouraged. Then talk. She didn't need to be told twice. As she ate, Catherine observed her unexpected protector. He wasn't what she'd expected of a cowboy. There was an educated quality to his speech, despite its frontier cadence, and he carried himself with the quiet authority of a man used to giving orders rather than taking them. When she had finally satisfied her hunger, Catherine took a deep breath and began her story. My father and I came to Montana Territory 2 years ago, after my mother passed. He was a geologist, convinced there was gold to be found in these mountains. She smiled sadly. Everyone thought he was crazy, but 6 months ago, he proved them wrong. We found a vein rich enough to keep us comfortable for life. Xavier listened intently as she continued. We kept it quiet, but somehow Abel Blackwood found out. He approached my father with an offer to buy the claim, but father refused. 3 days ago, I returned from town to find our cabin ransacked and my father. Her voice broke. He was dead, shot in the back. Abel was still there, searching for the deed. I managed to grab it and escape through the back window while he was distracted. And you've been running ever since, Xavier concluded. Catherine nodded, twisting the worn fabric of her dress between her fingers. The deed is all I have left of my father's dream. Without it, I have nothing. Xavier was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on the table. Abel Blackwood, he finally said. I've heard that name. He's a mining investor with connections to the railroad companies, known for acquiring properties through means that don't always bear close examination. He's a murderer, Catherine said firmly. That too, Xavier agreed, and not a man to give up easily. That shoulder wound will slow him down, but it won't stop him. He'll be looking for you again as soon as he's patched up. Catherine's stomach knotted with fear. What can I do? The sheriff isn't here, and even if he was, it would be my word against Abel's. I have no proof he killed my father. First things first, Xavier said practically. We need to get you somewhere safe. My brother's ranch is about 40 miles northwest of here. We'll leave at first light tomorrow. Why are you helping me? Catherine asked, the question that had been nagging at her finally finding voice. You don't know me. This isn't your fight. Xavier's expression grew distant, his eyes focusing on something Catherine couldn't see. Let's just say I have my reasons for disliking men who prey on those weaker than themselves. He stood abruptly. Come on. There's a boarding house across the street where you can get a proper night's rest. I'll take a room there too, just to be safe. As they crossed the street, Catherine was acutely aware of Xavier's protective presence beside her. For the first time in 3 days, she felt something other than fear, a tentative hope that perhaps she might survive this nightmare after all. The boarding house was run by a plump, cheerful widow named Mrs. Peterson who clucked sympathetically when she saw Catherine's exhausted state. Poor dear, you look dead on your feet. she said, leading Catherine to a small but clean room on the second floor. A good night's sleep will do wonders. Xavier took the room next door, promising to knock on her door at dawn. Keep this with you, he said quietly, pressing a small Derringer pistol into her hand, just in case. The weight of the weapon was unfamiliar and frightening, but Catherine nodded, tucking it under her pillow when she was alone. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was elusive. Every creak of the boarding house timbers had her sitting up in alarm, the small pistol clutched in her trembling hand. When dawn finally came, Catherine had managed only a few hours of fitful sleep. Nevertheless, she felt stronger than she had the day before. After washing her face in the basin of cold water Mrs. Peterson had provided, she changed into the clean clothes the kind landlady had lent her, a simple brown skirt and white blouse that were slightly too large but infinitely better than her travel-stained dress. Xavier's knock came precisely at dawn. He looked as though he had slept no better than she had, but his eyes were alert as he assessed her. "You ready to ride, Miss Catherine?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, returning his Derringer. "Though I should warn you, I haven't been on a horse since I was 12. A hint of amusement crossed his features. "You'll remember quick enough. It's not something you forget." Mrs. Peterson provided them with a breakfast of eggs and biscuits, along with a package of provisions for their journey. "You take care of this young lady, Mr. Reeves," she instructed as they prepared to leave. "There's something not right about that man who was looking for her." "Yes, madame," Xavier replied with respectful solemnity. Outside, 2 horses waited, Xavier's own chestnut gelding and a gentle-looking bay mare that he had apparently procured for Catherine. "This is Daisy," Xavier said, helping Catherine mount. "She's steady and sweet-tempered, just the kind of horse for someone getting reacquainted with riding." As Catherine settled nervously into the saddle, adjusting her skirts, Xavier checked the cinch on his own horse. "We'll take it slow at first," he assured her. "Give you time to find your seat." They rode out of Redemption Creek as the town was just beginning to stir. Catherine couldn't help glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see Abel pursuing them, but the street behind them remained empty. "He won't be following just yet," Xavier said, noticing her anxiety. "That shoulder wound will need at least a day's rest before he's fit to ride. By then, we'll be well on our way to my brother's ranch." The day passed in a rhythm of steady hoofbeats. Xavier led them north out of town, following a trail that wound through pine forests and across open meadows bursting with spring wildflowers. Despite the circumstances, Catherine found herself captivated by the beauty of the Montana wilderness. "It's magnificent," she breathed as they paused atop a ridge overlooking a vast valley. "I've never seen anything like it." Xavier nodded, his expression softening as he surveyed the landscape. "This is why I came west. There's a freedom here you can't find anywhere else." "Where did you come from?" Catherine asked, realizing how little she knew about the man who had saved her life. Xavier was silent for a moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. "Philadelphia originally," he finally said. "My father was a judge. He had my life all planned out: law school, a position at his firm, marriage to the daughter of one of his colleagues." "But you had other ideas," Catherine guessed. A wry smile touched his lips. "You could say that. I made it through law school, even practiced for a year. But I was suffocating in that life. When the war came, I enlisted, much to my father's disapproval. After Appomattox, I couldn't bring myself to go back to Philadelphia and those stuffy courtrooms." He shrugged. "So I headed west, found work as a ranch hand, then eventually saved enough to buy my own spread. My brother followed a few years later." "Do you regret it?" Catherine asked. "Leaving that life behind?" Xavier looked at her, his blue eyes intent. "Not for a single day." There was something in his gaze that made Catherine's heart beat faster. She looked away, focusing on adjusting her reins. "We should keep moving," she said, suddenly self-conscious. They rode until dusk, making camp in a sheltered grove near a small stream. Xavier efficiently set about making a fire while Catherine unpacked the provisions Mrs. Peterson had provided. "I'm afraid it won't be as comfortable as the boarding house," Xavier apologized as he spread a bedroll for her near the fire. "After sleeping in haystacks and abandoned sheds for the past 3 nights, this looks like luxury," Catherine assured him. They ate a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried beef, with coffee boiled over the open fire. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and Catherine found herself moving closer to the flames, wrapping her arms around herself for warmth. Without a word, Xavier shrugged out of his coat and draped it over her shoulders. The garment was still warm from his body, carrying his scent leather, wood smoke, and something indefinably male. "Thank you," Catherine said softly. "Not just for the coat, for everything." Xavier nodded, his expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. "Get some rest. I'll take first watch." "You think Abel could have followed us already?" "It's unlikely," Xavier admitted. "But I'd rather not take chances." Catherine didn't argue. She wrapped herself in the blanket Xavier provided and lay down on the bedroll, his coat still around her shoulders. Despite her lingering fear and the unfamiliar surroundings, exhaustion soon pulled her into a deep sleep. She woke to Xavier gently shaking her shoulder. "Dawn's breaking," he said. "We should get moving." The second day of their journey took them through increasingly rugged terrain. Catherine's muscles protested the long hours in the saddle, but she gritted her teeth against the discomfort, determined not to slow their progress. "You're doing well," Xavier commented as they forded a shallow stream around midday. "Most city folk would be complaining by now." "I'm not most city folk," Catherine replied with a hint of pride. "And I stopped being a city girl when my father brought me to Montana." Xavier's answering smile sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. As the day wore on, Xavier pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his time in the territory. Catherine found herself laughing at his tales of frontier mishaps and adventures, momentarily forgetting the danger that had brought them together. "We're making good time," Xavier observed as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. "We should reach my brother's ranch by mid-morning tomorrow." They made camp earlier than the previous night, in a protected hollow near a small lake. While Xavier tended to the horses, Catherine gathered wood for the fire, pleased to be contributing something to their journey. "My father would be shocked to see me now," she mused as they sat by the crackling fire after their meal. "He always worried I was too delicate for frontier life." "And were you?" Xavier asked. Catherine considered the question. "At first, perhaps. I missed the conveniences of St. Louis hot baths, proper shops, social gatherings. But I came to love the wildness of this place, the sense that anything is possible here." She smiled sadly. "Father was the same way. That's why he could never give up on finding his gold claim, even when everyone said he was chasing a fool's dream. And now that he's found it, what will you do with it?" Catherine touched the leather pouch containing the deed. "I don't know," she admitted. "I haven't thought beyond staying alive and keeping this safe. I suppose I could sell it, use the money to start over somewhere else." "Is that what you want? To leave Montana?" The question caught her off guard. I haven't really considered staying. Not without my father." Xavier was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. "This territory has a way of getting under your skin," he finally said, "making you belong to it, rather than the other way around." Catherine studied his profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows as he contemplated the fire. In the short time she had known him, Xavier Reeves had become more than just her protector. He had become someone she trusted, someone whose presence brought her comfort in the midst of her grief and fear. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, eager to learn more about him. His expression lightened. "It's nothing fancy, about 100 acres with good grazing land and a decent-sized creek running through it. The cabin needs work, but it's solid. I've been building up my herd slowly, focusing on quality over quantity." "And your brother's place?" "Xander has a bigger spread, close to 500 acres. He raises horses as well as cattle. Has a proper house too, with actual glass windows." Xavier's voice held affection as he spoke of his brother. "He's done well for himself. Married a local girl 2 years ago. They have a baby boy now, about 6 months old." "You sound proud of him." "I am," Xavier acknowledged. "He took a risk coming out here, but it paid off. He's built a good life." "And what about you?" Catherine asked quietly. "Are you building a good life?" Xavier met her gaze across the fire, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "I'm working on it," he said simply. There was something in his voice, in the way he looked at her, that made Catherine's heart flutter. She looked away, suddenly flustered. "I should get some sleep," she said, rising from her place by the fire. "I'll wake you at dawn," Xavier replied, his voice giving no indication that he had noticed her discomfort. Catherine settled onto her bedroll, pulling the blanket up to her chin. From her position, she could see Xavier's silhouette against the starlit sky as he sat keeping watch. The sight brought her a sense of security she hadn't felt since finding her father's body. She closed her eyes, trying to quiet her thoughts, but her mind kept returning to Xavier, to his unexpected kindness, to the way his rare smiles transformed his face, to the gentle strength in his hands as he'd helped her mount Daisy. These were dangerous thoughts, she knew. Once they reached his brother's ranch, once a U.S. Marshal could be summoned to deal with Abel, their paths would likely diverge. Xavier had his own life, his own dreams that had nothing to do with a penniless gold miner's daughter with a valuable deed and a murderer on her trail. Yet as sleep finally claimed her, Catherine couldn't help wondering what it might be like to belong to this land, the way Xavier did to build something permanent in this wild, beautiful territory. She woke before dawn to the sound of Xavier moving quietly around the camp, rekindling the fire and preparing coffee. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, painting the clouds with delicate shades of pink and gold. "You're up early," Xavier noted, handing her a cup of steaming coffee. "I've always loved this time of day," Catherine replied, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm tin cup. "The world feels new, like anything is possible." Xavier studied her over the rim of his own cup. "You're not what I expected, Catherine Miller." "Oh? And what did you expect?" "When I first saw you hiding behind that water trough, trembling like a leaf, I thought you were just another Eastern girl in over her head out here." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "And now I think you might have more steel in your spine than most men I know," he said with quiet admiration. His words warmed her more than the coffee. "My father used to say the same thing. He said I got it from my mother. She crossed the Mississippi in a covered wagon when she was just 16. They broke camp efficiently and were on the trail as the sun cleared the eastern mountains." Catherine found herself dreading their arrival at Xavier's brother's ranch, knowing it would mark the end of their journey together. Despite the danger that had thrown them together, these past 2 days had awakened something in her, a sense of possibility, of connection that she wasn't ready to relinquish. The landscape grew more pastoral as they rode, with scattered homesteads and fenced pastures replacing the wild forests and meadows. By mid-morning, Xavier pointed to a distant cluster of buildings nestled in a green valley. "There it is, the Circle R," he said, a note of pride in his voice. "My brother's place." As they drew closer, Catherine could make out a substantial log home with a wide porch, several outbuildings, and corrals containing horses of various colors. A woman was hanging laundry on a line near the house, a baby balanced on her hip. "That's Nora, my brother's wife," Xavier explained. "And little James." The woman looked up at the sound of approaching horses, shading her eyes against the sun. Her face broke into a wide smile as she recognized Xavier, and she waved enthusiastically. "Xavier, you're early," she called, hurrying toward them as they dismounted in the yard. "Xander said you weren't due until next week." "Change of plans," Xavier replied, embracing his sister-in-law and the baby. "This is Miss Catherine Miller. She's in a bit of trouble, and I thought we might be able to help." Nora's warm brown eyes immediately took in Catherine's borrowed clothes and tired appearance. "Of course we can help," she said without hesitation. "Any friend of Xavier's is welcome here. Come inside, both of you. I've just made fresh bread, and there's stew keeping warm." The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable, with polished wooden floors, a stone fireplace, and actual upholstered furniture luxuries Catherine hadn't seen since leaving St. Louis. Nora insisted they eat before explaining anything, serving them generous bowls of venison stew and slices of warm bread slathered with butter. "Xander's out checking the north pasture with the hands," Nora explained as they ate. "He should be back by supper. Now, what kind of trouble brings you here with Xavier?" Between them, Xavier and Catherine related the events of the past few days: her father's murder, Abel's pursuit, and their journey from Redemption Creek. Nora listened with growing concern, bouncing little James on her knee when he grew fussy. "You poor dear," she said when they had finished. "Of course you must stay here as long as you need to. We can send for the U.S. Marshal in Helena. Xander knows him well." "Thank you," Catherine said, touched by the woman's immediate kindness. "I don't want to bring trouble to your home, though." "Nonsense." Nora dismissed her concern with a wave. "The Circle R can handle a bit of trouble. Besides, this Abel person has no idea where you've gone. You're safe here." Catherine wished she could believe that, but the knot of fear in her stomach refused to dissolve completely. Abel Blackwood had resources and determination. How long before he discovered which direction she and Xavier had taken? "I should check on the horses," Xavier said, rising from the table. "Make sure they're properly cooled down after the ride." When he had gone, Nora turned to Catherine with a knowing smile. "So, how long have you been in love with my brother-in-law?" Catherine choked on her coffee. I barely know him." Nora laughed, a warm, musical sound. "Oh, honey, I've seen the way you look at him. And more tellingly, I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." "You're imagining things," Catherine protested, her cheeks burning. "He's just been kind enough to help me." "Xavier Reeves doesn't just help anyone," Nora said, her expression growing serious. "He keeps to himself, works his ranch, visits us occasionally. In the 3 years I've known him, I've never seen him bring anyone here, especially not a woman." Catherine didn't know how to respond to that. "Even if what you're suggesting were true, which it isn't, it wouldn't matter. Once the marshal arrives and deals with Abel, I'll need to decide what to do about my father's claim. I have no place in Xavier's life." "Don't be so sure," Nora replied enigmatically. "Now, let me show you where you can rest. You look exhausted, and a proper bed will do you worlds of good." The room Nora led her to was small but pleasant, with a real feather mattress and clean linens. Catherine sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the past few days and Nora's unexpected observations. Could there be any truth to what Xavier's sister-in-law had suggested? Catherine thought of the moments they had shared around the campfire, the way Xavier's eyes sometimes lingered on her face when he thought she wasn't aware. But surely that was just concern for someone under his protection, not anything deeper. Yet as she drifted towards sleep, Catherine couldn't help remembering the warmth of Xavier's coat around her shoulders, the quiet intensity in his voice when he spoke of building a good life in this territory, and the way her heart seemed to beat a little faster whenever he was near. She was awakened some hours later by the sound of male voices and the clatter of horses in the yard. Looking out the window, she saw Xavier deep in conversation with a man who could only be his brother. They shared the same tall frame and broad shoulders, though Xander's hair was darker, and he lacked the scar on Xavier's jaw. Catherine quickly smoothed her hair and straightened her borrowed clothes before joining them outside. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard as the men turned to greet her. "Miss Miller," Xavier said formally. "This is my brother, Xavier Reeves." "Xander, Miss Catherine Miller." Xander's handshake was firm, his smile warm and open in a way his brother's rarely was. "A pleasure to meet you, Miss Miller. My wife tells me you've had quite an ordeal." "Please, call me Catherine," she insisted. "And yes, it's been difficult. Your brother has been incredibly kind." Xander raised an eyebrow, glancing at Xavier with something like surprise. "Has he now? That's not a word often associated with my brooding older brother." Xavier rolled his eyes. "I'm standing right here, Xander. And I'm sure you're as uncomfortable with the praise as ever," Xander retorted good-naturedly. He turned back to Catherine. "Nora says we need to contact Marshal Burke in Helena. I've already sent one of my hands to telegraph him. With luck, he'll be here within a week." A week. Catherine wasn't sure whether to be relieved at the prospect of justice for her father or dismayed at how soon her time in Xavier's company would end. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your family's kindness." "No need for that," Xander assured her. "Any friend of Xavier's is family as far as we're concerned." That evening, they gathered around the dining table for a hearty meal. Xander proved to be a natural storyteller, regaling them with tales of frontier life that had Catherine alternately laughing and gasping in astonishment. Even Xavier seemed more relaxed in his brother's company, occasionally contributing a dry comment or correction that sent Nora into peals of laughter. For a few hours, Catherine was able to set aside her grief and fear, losing herself in the warmth of this family gathering. She found herself studying Xavier when he wasn't looking, noticing the way the lamplight caught the golden highlights in his hair, the crinkles at the corners of his eyes when he smiled, the capable strength of his hands as he carved the roast. Nora caught her watching once and gave her a knowing wink that made Catherine blush and quickly look away. After dinner, while Nora put little James to bed, the men moved to the porch to smoke. Catherine joined them, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. "I've been thinking about your situation, Miss Catherine," Xander said, exhaling a stream of smoke. "Once Marshal Burke deals with this Blackwood character, you'll need to decide what to do about your father's claim." "I know," Catherine sighed. "I've been avoiding thinking about it, to be honest." "You have options," Xander continued. "You could sell the claim outright. There are reputable mining companies who would pay handsomely for a proven gold vein. Or you could retain ownership and hire someone to work it for you, taking a percentage of the profits. Or you could stay and oversee it yourself," Xavier added quietly, surprising both Catherine and his brother. "Me? Run a gold mine?" Catherine shook her head. "I wouldn't know the first thing about it." "You'd learn," Xavier said, his eyes holding hers in the gathering darkness. "You're not afraid of hard work or challenges. I've seen that much in the short time I've known you." There was something in his voice, a note of admiration or perhaps something deeper, that made Catherine's pulse quicken. "It's something to consider," Xander agreed, looking between them with sudden interest. "You wouldn't have to decide immediately. You could stay here while you weigh your options." "That's very generous," Catherine said, touched by their consideration. "It's settled then," Xander declared, standing and stretching. "You'll stay with us until the marshal arrives, and then you can take your time deciding what comes next." He glanced at his brother with a sly smile. "And I'm sure Xavier wouldn't mind riding over from his place to offer advice about territorial matters. Would you, brother?" Xavier shot him a warning look. "I'm sure Miss Catherine will make her own decisions when the time comes." "Of course she will," Xander agreed innocently. "Well, I'm turning in. Good night to you both." When Xander had gone, a comfortable silence settled between Catherine and Xavier. The night was clear, with a canopy of stars spreading across the vast Montana sky. From somewhere in the distance came the lonely howl of a wolf. "Is your ranch far from here?" Catherine asked after a while. "About 10 miles southwest," Xavier replied. "Not a large operation, just me and 2 hands managing about 100 head of cattle." "It sounds peaceful." Xavier's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Most days, though I'll admit, it can be a bit too quiet at times." "Is that why you went to Redemption Creek?" "For company." He shook his head. "I was delivering horses to the livery there, but I'm glad I was passing through when I was." His eyes found hers in the darkness. "Very glad." Catherine's breath caught at the intensity in his gaze. "So am I," she whispered. For a moment, she thought he might say more, might reach for her hand where it rested on the porch railing between them. But instead, Xavier straightened, taking a step back. "It's getting late," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "You should get some rest. You're safe here." "Good night, Xavier," Catherine said, unable to keep a note of disappointment from her voice. "Good night, Catherine," he replied softly. As she made her way back to her room, Catherine couldn't help feeling that something significant had passed between them on that moonlit porch, something neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. The next few days fell into a pleasant rhythm. Catherine helped Nora with household tasks, learning to cook over a wood stove and mend clothing with neat, tiny stitches. She spent time with little James, singing him the lullabies her own mother had once sung to her. In the evenings, the family gathered on the porch or around the fireplace, sharing stories and comfortable silences. Xavier divided his time between helping his brother with ranch work and checking on his own property. Each time he rode out, Catherine found herself watching the horizon until he returned, a habit that did not escape Nora's observant eye. "You know," Nora said casually one afternoon as they kneaded bread dough side by side, "Xavier's cabin has plenty of room for a wife. He built it with a family in mind, though he'd never admit to such sentimentality." "Nora," Catherine protested, flour dusting her cheeks as she blushed. "Please stop. There's nothing between Xavier and me." "Not yet," Nora replied with maddening confidence. "But I've seen the way you've been blooming here, Catherine. You belong in this territory, anyone can see that. And my brother-in-law has been alone far too long." Catherine focused on punching the dough with perhaps more force than necessary. "Even if I decided to stay in Montana, even if I were interested in Xavier that way, which I'm not saying I am, there's no indication he feels anything for me beyond a sense of obligation." Nora laughed outright at that. "For a clever woman, you can be remarkably blind. Xavier volunteered to ride into town for supplies yesterday, just so he could ask at the telegraph office if there was news from Marshal Burke. He's checking on your safety even when you don't realize it." Before Catherine could formulate a response, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Through the kitchen window, they saw 3 riders entering the yard: Xavier, Xander, and a third man wearing a distinctive badge on his vest. "The Marshal," Nora said, quickly wiping her hands on her apron. "He's here sooner than we expected." Catherine's heart sank. The arrival of Marshal Burke meant she would soon have to face Abel Blackwood again, would have to relive the horror of finding her father's body. It also meant her time at the Circle R was coming to an end. Marshal James Burke proved to be a stern but kind-faced man in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and the weathered complexion of someone who had spent decades in the saddle. He listened carefully as Catherine recounted the events surrounding her father's murder, taking detailed notes in a small leather-bound book. "You've been through a terrible ordeal, Miss Miller," he said when she had finished. "Rest assured, I take such matters very seriously. I'll be riding to Redemption Creek tomorrow to locate this Abel Blackwood and take him into custody." "He's dangerous," Catherine warned. "He won't go easily." The marshal's expression hardened. "Few murderers do, but I've been bringing criminals to justice in this territory for 15 years. I know how to handle his kind." "What happens after you arrest him?" Catherine asked. "He'll stand trial in Helena. With your testimony and the evidence of your father's murder, he should hang." Marshal Burke's tone was matter-of-fact. "As for your father's claim, once Blackwood is dealt with, you'll be free to return and manage it as you see fit." The thought of returning to the site of her father's murder filled Catherine with dread. Yet the gold claim was her inheritance, perhaps her only chance at independence. "I'll need to think about what to do with the claim," she said slowly. "Take your time," the marshal advised. "The law is on your side now. The claim is legally yours, and no one can take that from you." That evening, after the marshal had retired to the guest room Nora had prepared, Catherine found herself once again on the porch with Xavier. The night was cooler than usual, with a breeze that carried the scent of pine and distant rain. "The marshal seems confident about arresting Abel," Catherine said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "Burke is good at his job," Xavier agreed. "He'll see justice done for your father." "And then what?" Catherine asked, voicing the question that had been weighing on her. "What happens after Abel is arrested and tried?" Xavier was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "That depends on you," he finally said. "What do you want to happen, Catherine?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. What did she want? A week ago, her only desire had been to escape Abel Blackwood with her life. But now, "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Part of me thinks I should sell the claim and return east, perhaps to St. Louis where I still have some distant relatives. It would be the sensible thing to do." "And the other part?" Xavier prompted, his voice gentle. Catherine turned to face him, gathering her courage. "The other part has grown fond of Montana, of the people here." Their eyes met in the darkness, and Catherine felt a flutter of anticipation in her chest. Xavier took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Catherine," he began, his voice rough with emotion, but whatever he might have said was interrupted by the sound of a rifle shot in the distance, followed by the alarmed barking of the ranch dogs. Xavier's hand immediately went to his pistol. "Get inside," he ordered, all trace of tenderness gone from his voice. "Now." Catherine didn't argue. She hurried into the house as Xavier called out for his brother and the marshal. Within moments, the men had gathered in the main room, weapons ready. "That shot came from the North Ridge," Xander said grimly. "Could be nothing, maybe one of the hands spotted a wolf near the livestock. Or it could be trouble," Marshal Burke countered, checking his revolver. "Given Miss Miller's situation, we can't take chances." Another shot rang out, closer this time, followed by the sound of breaking glass as a window shattered in the kitchen. "Everybody down," Xavier shouted, pulling Catherine to the floor as more shots peppered the house. "It's Abel," Catherine gasped, terror flooding through her. "He's found me." "Stay here," Xavier instructed, his face hard with determination. "Keep your head down." The men took up positions at the windows, returning fire at the unseen attackers. Catherine crawled to where Nora was huddled in a corner, clutching baby James to her chest. "I'm so sorry," Catherine whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I've brought this danger to your home." "Hush," Nora soothed, though her own face was pale with fear. "This isn't your fault." The gunfight continued for what seemed like hours but was likely only minutes. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the shooting stopped. An eerie silence fell over the ranch. "They're pulling back," Marshal Burke announced, peering cautiously through a window. "I count at least 3 riders heading east." "We need to go after them," Xander insisted. "Not in the dark," the marshal countered. "That's exactly what they want to draw us out into an ambush. We'll track them at first light." Xavier crossed to where Catherine and Nora huddled. "Are you both all right?" he asked, his eyes scanning Catherine for any sign of injury. "We're fine," Catherine assured him, though she was trembling so hard she could barely speak. "Just frightened." Xavier's expression softened. He reached out to brush a tear from her cheek, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his fingertips. "You're safe," he said quietly. "I won't let anything happen to you." There was such fierce conviction in his voice that Catherine believed him, despite the evidence of Abel's persistence. In that moment, with Xavier's hand warm against her face, she felt something shift inside her, a certainty that hadn't been there before. The ranch hands arrived shortly after, having heard the gunfire from the bunkhouse. With additional men to stand guard, the family was able to get some rest, though no one slept deeply. Catherine lay awake for hours, listening to the sounds of men patrolling outside her window, jumping at every creak and rustle in the darkness. Dawn brought a flurry of activity as Marshal Burke organized a posse to track the attackers. Xavier insisted on joining them, despite his brother's suggestion that he stay behind to protect the house. "Burke and the boys can handle the tracking," Xander argued. "You're needed here." "I need to see this through," Xavier replied firmly, his eyes finding Catherine across the room. "I need to know she'll be truly safe." Something passed between the brothers, an unspoken communication born of years of shared understanding. Finally, Xander nodded. "All right, but take care. I've only got the one brother, and I'm rather attached to him." As Xavier prepared to ride out with the marshal and 4 ranch hands, Catherine followed him to the barn. He was checking his rifle, his movements efficient and practiced. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "You've already done more than enough for me." Xavier paused, lowering the weapon to look at her. "Yes, I do," he said simply. "I need to." "Why?" Catherine pressed, needing to hear him say it. Xavier stepped closer, his blue eyes intense in the dim light of the barn. "Because I can't imagine a life where you're always looking over your shoulder, always afraid. Because I want you to be free to choose your own path, whether that leads back east or—" He hesitated, then finished softly, "or somewhere closer." Catherine's heart thundered in her chest. "Xavier, I know it's too soon," he interrupted. "We've known each other barely a week. But I've never met anyone like you, Catherine Miller. Your courage, your spirit," he broke off, shaking his head as if words were insufficient. "Just know that when this is over, when you're truly safe, I have things I want to say to you. Important things." Before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, a brief, tender kiss that left her breathless. Then he was gone, swinging up onto his horse and riding out with the posse, leaving Catherine standing in the barn doorway, her fingers touching her lips in wonder. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Catherine helped Nora clean up the damage from the night's attack, sweeping broken glass, patching the bullet holes in the walls with cloth until proper repairs could be made. They worked mostly in silence, both women's thoughts with the men who had ridden out. "They'll be all right," Nora said at last, as if trying to convince herself as much as Catherine. "Xander knows this land better than anyone, and Xavier is the best shot in the territory. And Marshal Burke has been doing this job since before Montana was even a territory. Catherine nodded, wishing she shared the other woman's confidence. Abel is desperate, she said quietly. Men like that are dangerous. So are men protecting what they love, Nora replied, giving Catherine a meaningful look. Love. The word hung in the air between them. Was that what Xavier felt for her? Was that what she felt for him? A week ago, she would have laughed at the notion of falling in love so quickly. But now, with the memory of Xavier's kiss still fresh on her lips, Catherine couldn't deny the truth of her feelings. It was near sunset when they heard hoofbeats approaching. Catherine and Nora rushed to the porch, straining to see who was returning. As the riders came into view, Catherine's heart sank. Only 3 men were approaching, and none of them was Xavier. Xander dismounted first, his face grim with exhaustion. Abel Blackwood is dead, he announced without preamble. He drew on the marshal when we cornered him and his men in a canyon about 15 miles east of here. And Xavier? Catherine asked, her voice barely a whisper. Where is Xavier? Xander's expression softened. He took a bullet in the shoulder. Nothing serious, but the marshal insisted on taking him to the doctor in Silver Creek. They should be back tomorrow or the next day. Relief flooded through Catherine, followed quickly by renewed worry. He was shot? How bad is it really? Truly, it's not serious, Xander assured her. The bullet went clean through. He was more annoyed about being sent to the doctor than concerned about the wound itself. That night, Catherine barely slept, her mind filled with images of Xavier wounded and in pain. By morning, she had made a decision. After breakfast, she approached Xander as he prepared to ride out to check on the cattle. I want to go to Silver Creek, she announced. To see Xavier. Xander studied her face, then nodded. I thought you might. I'll have one of the hands ride with you. It's about 3 hours at an easy pace. The journey to Silver Creek seemed interminable, though Catherine's escort, a taciturn ranch hand named Joe, assured her they were making good time. The town itself was larger than Redemption Creek, with several streets of businesses and homes surrounding a central square. The doctor's office was easy to find, a neat white building with a sign proclaiming, Dr. William Thompson, physician and surgeon. Catherine's heart pounded as she dismounted and approached the door. Inside, she found Marshal Burke dozing in a chair in the waiting room. He started awake at her entrance, then smiled when he recognized her. Miss Miller, he greeted her. I should have known you'd come. How is he? Catherine asked without preamble. Ornery as a wounded bear, the marshal replied with a chuckle. The doctor gave him laudanum for the pain, which he refused to take. Says it makes his head fuzzy. That sounds like Xavier, Catherine said, unable to suppress a fond smile. Can I see him? Of course. Through that door, first room on the right. Doctor's just changed his bandages, so he should be decent. Catherine took a deep breath and knocked softly on the indicated door. If that's Thompson with more of his cursed laudanum, you can keep it, came Xavier's irritated voice from within. Catherine pushed the door open. It's not the doctor, she said. Xavier was sitting up in bed, his shoulder heavily bandaged, his face pale but his eyes clear and alert. Those eyes widened in surprise at the sight of her. Catherine, he breathed. What are you doing here? I came to see you, of course, she replied, moving to sit in the chair beside his bed. Xander said you were shot. Xavier grimaced. It's nothing. A scratch. Thompson is being overly cautious, insisting I stay overnight for observation. A bullet wound is hardly nothing, Catherine scolded gently. You could have been killed. But I wasn't, he pointed out. Then, his expression growing serious. Abel Blackwood is dead, Catherine. He can't hurt you anymore. Catherine nodded, emotions welling up inside her: relief, gratitude, and something deeper and more profound. I know. The marshal will want my formal statement for the territorial court, but after that. After that, you're free, Xavier finished for her. Free to do whatever you choose. There was a question in his eyes, one he was too proud or too uncertain to voice. Catherine reached out, taking his hand in hers. I've made my decision, she said softly. About the gold claim, about my future. Xavier's hand tightened around hers. And I'm staying in Montana, Catherine said, holding his gaze steadily. I'm going to hire someone to work the claim for me, but I won't be living there. Too many painful memories. Where will you live? Xavier asked, his voice carefully neutral, though his eyes betrayed his hope. Catherine smiled, feeling suddenly shy despite her determination. Well, that depends. I've heard there's a ranch about 10 miles southwest of the Circle R. The owner apparently built a cabin with room for a family, though he lives there alone. A slow smile spread across Xavier's face, transforming his features. It's a modest place, he warned. Nothing like what you might have had in St. Louis. I don't want St. Louis, Catherine replied. I want Montana. I want this life. I want... She hesitated, then finished in a rush. I want you, Xavier Reeves. If you'll have me. Xavier reached up with his good arm, his hand gently cupping her cheek. Catherine Miller, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I've wanted you since I first saw you emerge from behind that water trough, brave and terrified all at once. I just never imagined you might want me too. Well, I do, Catherine whispered, leaning into his touch. Very much. This time when their lips met, there was no hesitation, no brevity. Xavier kissed her with all the pent-up longing of the past week, and Catherine responded in kind, pouring her heart into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said simply. I know it's fast, maybe too fast, but I'm certain of it. I love you too, Catherine replied, the words feeling right and true on her lips. And if there's one thing I've learned in Montana, it's that life is unpredictable and precious. Why waste time when you know what you want? Xavier laughed, the sound warm and full of joy. My practical, brave Catherine, always direct to the heart of the matter. So, Catherine said, a teasing note entering her voice, this cabin of yours, does it have glass windows like your brother's house? Not yet, Xavier admitted, but it could. With the right woman's touch, it could be a real home. Our home, Catherine corrected, her heart swelling with happiness. Just as soon as the doctor releases you. Tomorrow, Xavier insisted. I'm leaving tomorrow, with or without Thompson's blessing. Catherine laughed, pressing another quick kiss to his lips. We'll see what the doctor says. I'm not starting our life together by letting you reopen that wound through stubbornness. Xavier's expression softened at her words. Our life together, he repeated. I like the sound of that. So do I, Catherine agreed, settling herself more comfortably in the chair, still holding his hand. So do I. 3 weeks later, Catherine stood on the porch of a sturdy log cabin, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Their ranch spread before her, 100 acres of good Montana land with cattle grazing in the distance. Behind her, the door opened, and Xavier stepped out, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. His shoulder had healed well, with only occasional stiffness to remind them of the bullet he had taken to protect her. What are you thinking about, Mrs. Reeves? He murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. Catherine smiled, still getting used to her new name. They had been married just a week ago, in a simple ceremony at the Circle R with Xander, Nora, little James, and a few friends in attendance. Marshal Burke had made the journey from Helena to give the bride away, a gesture that had brought tears to Catherine's eyes. "I'm thinking about how much has changed in just 1 month," she replied, leaning back into his embrace. "About how I was hiding from a man with a gun, until a cowboy stood in the way." Xavier chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her back. "Not much of a cowboy. My father would be horrified to hear you call me that." "You're my cowboy?" Catherine insisted, turning in his arms to face him. "My protector, my partner, my love. And you're my brave, beautiful wife," Xavier replied, his blue eyes warm with adoration. "The woman who makes this cabin a home." The cabin was indeed becoming a home. With the first proceeds from her father's gold claim, Catherine had purchased glass for the windows, proper furnishings, and even a piano that had been delivered all the way from Denver. Xavier had initially protested such an extravagance, but had fallen silent when Catherine played the first notes, filling their home with music. "I have news," Catherine said, a secretive smile playing at her lips. "I received a letter from Mr. Hargrove today." Hargrove was the experienced miner Catherine had hired to manage her father's claim. Xavier raised an eyebrow questioningly. "And? Is the vein playing out already?" Catherine shook her head, her smile widening. "Quite the opposite. He's found a second vein even richer than the first. He says at current production, the mine should yield steady profits for at least 10 years. Xavier whistled low. "That's wonderful news, Catherine. Your father would be proud." "I like to think so," she agreed, a hint of sadness touching her expression before being replaced by determination. "I've decided to use part of the proceeds to establish a school in Redemption Creek. The town is growing, and there are children there with no proper education." Xavier's face softened with pride. "A fitting memorial to your father, the professor's daughter, bringing education to the frontier." "Will you help me?" Catherine asked. "It will mean riding into town regularly, speaking with parents, finding a teacher." "I will help you with anything and everything you wish to do," Xavier promised, drawing her closer. "For the rest of our lives." As the last light of day faded from the sky, Catherine stood in the circle of her husband's arms, marveling at the journey that had brought her here. From terror and grief to love and hope, from a woman fleeing for her life to a woman building a future, all because a cowboy had stood between her and danger on a dusty street one fateful day. "I love you, Xavier Reeves," she whispered, rising on tiptoes to press her lips to his. "And I love you, Catherine Reeves," he replied against her mouth, "more than I ever thought possible." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they stood together on the porch of their home, two souls who had found each other against all odds in the vast wilderness of Montana Territory. The future stretched before them bright with promise, rich with possibility, and bound together by a love born in danger but destined to thrive in peace.